Hey guys, I'm going to read Elijah Buxton and try to use Flipgrid for this. So I'm going to upload it to Flipgrid. You have to watch this video and then you can respond to it. So when we left off last time, it was when the new free people had arrived, and Miss Duncan the first and Miss Duncan the second realized that the woman was their sister, whom they had not seen in like 13 years. But instead of tell her that they recognized her and sort of embrace that, they decided not to because they thought it would be too traumatic for her because of everything that she had been through. So we're going to continue on. This is chapter 13, and it's called Mail from America. One of my favoriteest chores is going to Chatham to check on the mail. It's not something that happens regular because we have our own post office here in Buxton, but every once in a while the mail won't come for 2 or 3 weeks and someone's got to go figure out why. It's one of my favoriteest chores, but that's only true if I'm allowed to take old Flapjack instead of one of those saddle horses. Even when those horses are walking slow, they're still too fast for my taste. On Wednesday, right after school, Pa told me to go straight to Chatham for the mail. He didn't come right out and say to take a horse, so when I got to the stable, I asked Mr. Sagi for old Flapjack. I knowed it weren't right, but it didn't seem like it was wrong neither. It was kind of middling twixt the two. Me and old Flapjack weren't but 2 miles out of Buxton, going slow and easy toward Chatham, when I got wishing I shied away from the wrong and gone more to the right. Old Flap gave one of them snorts to let me know he'd sensed something dangerous. He even kicked his front heels off the ground instead of his rear ones, something I didn't know he could even do. I grabbed a hold of his mane and looked hard at the woods. I couldn't see nothing at first. Maybe old Flap had smelt something wrong. Then for the second time, he did the trick he'd just learned. The first time was practice. Now he was better at it. He throwed his front heels up so high that I slid right off his haunches. Me and my tote sack and the empty mailbag spilt right out onto the road. I didn't hurt nothing, but as soon as I jumped back up, old Flap did another trick I had never seen him do before. He started running. He was real stiff-legged and clumsy looking, but no other word but running came to mind. Ain't nothing in the world more disturbing than watching your mule, who you thought was one of your best friends, try to gallop away after dumping you in the road so's you could get at by whatever it was that got him so afeared. I grabbed my tote sack and pulled 3 chunking stones out. I turned to the woods ready to throw, but weren't nothing there. Whatever scared old Flapjack must have took off soon as I hit the dirt. I looked a little farther down the road and saw old Flapjack had decided he weren't too fond of running. He'd quit and gone over in a field to chew on something. I ran to him, gentled him down some, then climbed back on top, and we started back toward Chatham. But this was a trip that weren't meant to be. 'Twarn't but 5 minutes later that Mr. Polite came out of the woods holding on to the necks of 3 pheasants and a shotgun. "Afternoon, Mr. Polite." "Afternoon, Elijah." "Where's about you heading?" "I'm going to Chatham." "What for?" "To check on the mail, sir." "Well, not on that worthless mule you ain't. You head right on back to that stable and tell Clarence Sagi to give you Conqueror or Jingle Boy. I ain't expecting a package from Toronto, but I needs to have it. I've been expecting a package from Toronto, and I needs to have it before the 20th century gets here." "Yes, sir." I turned old Flapjack back toward Buxton to trade him for one of those doggone horses. When me and Jingle Boy got to Chatham, we went right to their post office. I tied the horse out front, waited for my insides to quit shaking, and then stepped onto the stoop. I pulled on the doorknob and near about jerked my shoulder out. The door was locked, which was mighty peculiar because it couldn't have been much past 4 o'clock. It weren't till then that I saw a sign that someone had stuck up on the window. "Closed until the 5th. Any inquiries, see George at the dry goods store." I went next door to Mr. McMahon's dry goods store. The place had a great smell. It was fresh cured leather and new material mixed up with fancy powder and soap. When you opened the screen door, a bell rung to let people know you were there. It rung again when you left, so's folks knowed you were gone. The white man that was folding up sheets of cloth for women's dresses behind the counter looked up at me. "Well, hello, Elijah. How are you?" "Fine, thank you, Mr. McMahon. What can I do for you today, laddie?" I'd learned a long time ago that Mr. McMahon didn't mean nothing bad when he called you laddie. It sure sounded like he was mispronouncing lady, but we got told to ignore it. I'm here about the mail, sir. The sign had said, come talk to you. Leastways, that's what I hoped it said. Inquiries was one of them words that I ain't got notion the first about. Oh, I was wondering when someone from Buxton would come. Then you haven't heard what happened? No, sir. Well, laddie, we've had to find a new postman. Larry Butler had an absolutely terrible accident. When Mr. McMahon said words like terrible, he made it sound like they had like 7 or 8 R's in them instead of just one. Well, what happened, sir? As near as we could figure, his horse threw him and trampled off. Hoof caught him right in the head. This was more proof that a mule is way better than a horse. If Mr. Butler had been riding old Flapjack, he'd still be delivering the mail. Mr. McMahon said, give me one more minute, Elijah. I know there's a package in the post office and perhaps a letter or two. Not too much. Yes, sir. He finished folding the cloth and picked up his crutches to take me back to the post office. A long time ago, Mr. McMahon had a bad run-in with a horse himself. That's why his right leg ended at his knee instead of his foot. When he was on crutches, he moved real graceful and smooth. He'd been without a leg for so long that it looked like the crutches were part of his body. It almost looked like he was dancing when he walked. When we got inside the post office, Mr. McMahon hefted a box onto the shelf and then looked in a mailing bag that had Buxton written across the front. Seems to be only one package and one letter. Elijah, I could have swore there was more. He handed me the letter. Thank you, sir. Someone's going to have to come pick up the mail until the 5th. The new man should be up and running by then. Yes, sir. Tell Mr. Butler I'm sorry about his accident. Thanks for the kind words, Elijah. But wouldn't matter much what we told him. His mind isn't amongst us anymore. Mr. McMahon danced to the door, then locked up behind us. He went over to Jingle Boy and patted him on the neck. Most beautiful horse I've ever seen, Elijah. Hard to believe he's so fast. He is, sir. I lifted the box onto the saddle, then jumped up myself. What with seeing all the damage horses had done in Chatham and being natural nervous about being up this high, I didn't look to see who the letter was to until we were halfway back to Buxton. My heart sunk when I saw what was written across the front in proper letters. Mrs. Emmeline Holton, Negro Settlement at Raleigh, Canada West. On the back, above the red wax seal, it said, Applewood, Fairfax County, Virginia, United States. This was trouble. Did nothing good ever come out of one of these letters from America? If the words on the envelope were written in regular old plain letters that looked like someone had fought hard and long to get the writing down, most times it meant that some person who was a slave had snuck it out and it was full of rotten news. I was going to tell about a father getting sick or a brother getting whooped bad or a mother's children getting sold away. If the letter was writ fancy, like this one was, with swirlingness and curlicues and such nonsense, it only meant one thing. A friendly white person was writing to let you know that somebody was dead. Since this letter was addressed to Miss Holton, it probably was some bad news about her husband. My ride back from Chatham weren't a good one. It weren't that the road had gone bad or the skeeters were heavier than they were afore or that Jingle Boy was bouncing more than regular. But the fancy writ envelope in the pouch made the riding home long and sad. I left Mr. Polite's package on his stoop, then took Jingle Boy back to Mr. Sagi. Instead of taking the letter direct to Miss Holton, I walked back home with it to see what Ma was going to say. I pulled my brogans off and went in through the front door. Ma? She weren't in the parlor. Ma? She weren't upstairs in her bedroom. Ma? Nor my bedroom. Ma? Nor the kitchen. There was one of her peach pies on the kitchen table cooling, and I thought for a second about lifting a piece of the crust and digging a couple peaches out with one of my fingers, but then I thought better of it. I pulled my socks off and went out the back door. Ma was squatted down, tended to her truck patch. I pulled my socks off and went out the back. Excuse me. She saw me and smiled and was about to say hello. Ma's are some amazing people sometimes. Seems like they got ways of seeing things they ain't showing and hearing things that ain't being said. I didn't even open my mouth, but Ma knowed by some mystery way that something weren't right. She quick stood up and said, Elijah, what's wrong? The trowel she'd been using and a fistful of weeds fell out of her hand. What happened? She ran up to me and I showed her the letter from America. She wiped her hands on her coveralls and said, you see, I ain't got my spectacles on. Who to it? Who's it from? All the grown folks that had never learned to read nor write whilst they were slaved in America had to take lessons at the schoolhouse at night. Between cooking and cleaning and gardening and sewing and knitting and working the fields at harvest time and helping out with the chopping bees and the raising bees and tending to her sheep and shearing them and gathering wool and carding it and spinning it, Ma had been lazy and was slacking off on her school lessons, and they weren't sticking particular good. I told her what was writ on the envelope, and she said, oh, no, 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 no. Don't it ever end? Ma didn't waste no time. She said, go get your Sunday clothes on, Elijah. We're going to go together to tell her. I knowed I was going to have to read the letter out loud to Miss Holton, too. She was taking lessons with Ma. And I don't mean no disrespect to Mr. Travis, but it appeared he was having a powerful bad time in making his lessons stick with any of the grown folks. So basically what he's saying is all the adults are trying to learn to read and write, but they're adults and they're very busy. So they're not actually learning. I changed to my Sabbath school clothes and walked into the parlor. Ma had already put on her Sunday dress and was carrying that pie she'd baked. She said, good thing I baked this here pie. I hate to go for something like this barehanded. She set the pie down and opened her arms. I walked in and she kissed the top of my head and mashed her cheek there. Her voice and the warmness now from her face both spread across the top of my head. Now, Elijah, you knows you most likely going to be breaking some bad news to Miss Holton, so don't forget. I'm going to need you to be strong. I'm going to need you not to rile her and them girls up none by crying and carrying on. And I'm especially need you to not go tearing out of Miss Holton's home screaming if this here is bad news. Can you do it? I know it ain't a child's place to feel this way, but the person that raised you, but I was disappointed in Ma. Something awful. She hadn't took no notices that I've been doing a lot of growing in the past few weeks. Twant but the other day I was eavesdropping and heard her tell Pa that it's a miracle that I weren't born into slavery because I'm way too fragile to have survived even a minute of it. Maybe I just used to be a little fragile, but I ain't been afeard of nonsense nor running off screaming about the littlest things for a longest time. And besides, it just ain't right to be calling somebody fragile nohow. Can I count on you to be grown, Elijah? Yes, ma'am. It was going to be hard, though. Don't nothing seem to make you want to tear up and cry more than being told not to. I was even starting to feel something loosen up and slopping around in my nose now. Ma kissed the top of my head again and turned me loose. We started out toward Miss Holton's place. Miss Duncan the first and Miss Duncan the second were tending their flower garden out of their in front of their home. Miss Duncan the first saw us and stood up and called, Sarah, what's wrong? What happened? Miss Duncan the second stood up too. She said, Sarah. Ma told him, Elijah done pick up a letter for Miss Holton. It come from down home. Both the women wiped their hands on their skirts, and Miss Duncan the second said, hold on, we're coming with you. That poor, poor thing. By the time we got to Miss Holton's home, what started out with me and Ma and a letter had turned into a whole parade of people. There were 12 of us, 3 babies and 8 women that were all carrying something to eat. There were pies and cornbread and chicken livers and ham and dandelion greens and grits. There weren't a whole lot of talking going on as we walked to Miss Holton's. When we got there, Ma pushed me forward onto the stoop to knock. There weren't nothing but a screen door to keep horseflies out. The main door was open and I could look right into the parlor. I knocked and Penelope and Cicely, Miss Holton's girls, looked up at me from where they were playing on the floor. They smiled when they saw it was me. Miss Holton got up out of her chair. She was holding the same reading primer that I'd studied from about 5 years past. She smiled at me and said, why, hello, Elijah. Mr. Leroy ain't working yet? My goodness, how come you's in your Sunday? She opened the door and her breathing got stuck in her throat for a moment. When she saw the bunch on her stoop, she said, "Oh, oh." The primer slipped out of her fingers and landed on the stoop's wood floor. I handed it back to her, and she smiled at everyone and said, "Welcome, y'all, come on in." We all pulled off our shoes and walked in. She had her parlor set up just as nice as ours. There was a table and a rocking chair and a bench and a big brick fireplace and maple wood floors and rugs. She said, "I'm sorry there ain't enough chairs, but please make yourself comfortable best way y'all can." She turned to her two children and told them, "Y'all go out in the garden and pick Mama some flowers. Make sure you bring some of them pretty purple and white ones." The oldest girl said, "But Ma, you said they ain't ready to be picked yet." Miss Holton said, "I think they're ready now, Penelope." Penelope said, "Good afternoon, y'all," then asked her mother, "Why are all these folks visiting us?" Miss Holton said, "Ain't nothing to worry about, darling. Now do as I say. Stay till I calls you, and don't leave the yard." She gave both the girls a hug and a kiss. Penelope held on to Cicely's hand and took her out through the front door. "Can I offer y'all something?" Ma said, "Thank you kindly, Sister Holton, but Elijah done pick up a letter for you in Chatham. It from down home." Miss Holton told me, "Elijah, could you read it for me?" She waved the primer she was studying from. "I ain't too far along in my reading lessons yet." Miss Duncan the first put her hand on the rocking chair and said, "Why don't you get off your feet, Sister Holton?" "I'm fine, Miss Duncan, really I am, but thank you kindly, Elijah." I started opening the letter, but before I could get my finger on it and bust the wax seal open, she said, "If you don't mind, Elijah, I wants to open it." "Well, I don't mind at all, ma'am." She picked the wax off the envelope and put it in the front pocket of her apron. She pulled the letter out. She looked it over and then handed it back to me. I said, "It was writ about a year ago, Miss Holton." I looked the letter over and knowed I was going to have to sound some of the words out. It read, "My dearest Emmeline, I'm hoping that this letter finds you and the children in good health. We hear many wonderful things about the Negro settlement there and are grateful that God in his infinite mercy and wisdom has seen fit to provide you and yours a refuge." A refuge is like a safe place. Miss Holton stopped me. I was feared she was upset because I stumbled on some of the words, but that weren't it. She looked the envelope over and said, "I believe this here's Miss Poole's handwriting. She do like prettying up what she said. You're going to have to tell me about some of those words, Elijah. What refuge mean?" I know that from Sabbath school. I said, "Refuge means it's somewhere that's safe." She nodded her head and I started back up reading. "However, I'm afraid this missive is not one of glad tidings. I'm afraid I have some tragic news that I must tell you." I stopped to see if Miss Holton needed any more explaining, but she didn't. I was glad because I didn't have the notion what missive meant. That just means like a message. After a harsh, forced journey to Applewood, John was brought back into servitude. Much to our horror, to set an example and in retaliation for the gold that he claims John stole, Mr. Tillman exacted a punishment so severe that due to the rigors of the march home, John's body could not endure, and he went to the loving arms of our Savior on the 7th day of the 5th month in the year of our Lord, 1859. He is resting peacefully in the slave burial grounds, and we made certain he had a Christian service and paid $15 for a marked grave. I'm sorry to have to burden you with such news. You and the children are in our prayers. If you are so disposed to remunerate me for this expense, please forward the money to me at Applewood. Sincerely, Mrs. Jacob Poole. So remunerate means to pay her back for the money that she spent to bury Miss Holton's husband. Miss Holton stood there. It didn't seem like none of those 8 women looked direct in her face, but I knowed they were all ready to jump in case she had a fainting spell or went fragile. But Miss Holton didn't flinch or nothing. She said to me, "Read that part again, please, Elijah, that part about John getting punished." So I cleared my throat and read, "Mr. Tillman exacted a punishment so severe that due to the rigors of the march home, John's body could not endure." She raised her hand. I got ready to tell her that I was middling good at reading words, but lots of times I didn't know what they meant. But she shook her head back and forth and said, his body could not endure. That sure enough is a gentle way of putting it when one man done killed another with a whip. Miss Holton smiled at the women and said, thank you all kindly for your care, but I'm going to be all right. I knowed already. I've been kind of left hanging since we got here, but now all I hopes is that he felt that we got through. In spite of what Miss Poole say, that'd be the only thing would have make John rest peaceful. I hope he knows that he felt the joy and the love that y'all done give us this past year. She gave a little snuffle, and I thought for sure she was fixing to cry, but she just said, I hope he knowed. How beautiful his girls looked when they free. Miss Holton sat down in her rocker and said, he wouldn't have wanted no heavy mourning, and I love him enough to honor that, so I'm going to be all right. The women started in with touching Miss Holton and saying a lot of sorry and that were there to help and call on me. Miss Holton touched each of their hands and said, y'all forgive me. Y'all been kind enough to bring all this food, and here I am acting like I ain't got no manners at all. Please, let's eat. She stood up and went to the kitchen. She called her children in, and we all started eating. When it came time to go, me and Ma hung back until everyone else left. Once they all got to talking, Ma and Miss Holton found out that they were both from the same state down in America, and the plantations they were trapped on were a couple of miles from another. They could even call the names of some of the same people from back there, but it was all white people, because the people who were slaves weren't allowed to go from place to place. We were on the front stoop, and I was pulling my brogans on, and Ma and Miss Holton hugged, and Ma said, Sister Emmeline, please, if you find yourself needing anything, come see me or send word through Eli or Leroy. Miss Holton said, thank you, Sister Sarah. Small world, ain't it? It sure is comforting to know we's from the same place, but I'm going to be all right. I just relieved to know what happened, that's all. Ain't too much harder nor more worrying to keep up than false hopes, and I'm glad that they're gone. Only thing is, I can't get them words Miss Poole wrote out of my head that his body could not endure. It just don't seem to be right. It don't seem like them should be the last words spoke about John Holton. Ma said, well, the body don't never endure, do it? But I hopes, now I knows that something inside all of us be so strong that it can't be stopped. It fly on forever. Miss Holton said, Sister Sarah, your word's been a big comfort to me, and you and all the other Buxton sisters been a big help. Thank you kindly, and thank you kindly, Elijah, for reading the letter. Me and your ma is going to be doing that on our own before too much longer. Ma laughed and said, you got more faith than me, Emmeline. This reading and writing seem to be two of them things that don't come easy once you're full grown. Ain't nothing to do but struggle on, though. Whilst me and Ma were walking home, I was about to bust, waiting on her to tell me how I did. You can't never be sure till you get the word from someone that's groaned. But I was thinking what I just did was pretty good sign that my days of being fragile were over. I hadn't cried, nor let my voice get shaky, nor even sniffled whilst I was reading that letter to Miss Holton. I weren't going to tell Ma, but I didn't think it was being groaned that got me through it. Mostly, I think, I didn't bawl, because once Ma and them women hunched around Miss Holton with their watching, waiting eyes and hands, it felt like a whole slew of soldiers was ringing that parlor with swords drawed, and weren't no sorrow so powerful it could burst through. Once them women bunched up like that in Miss Holton's parlor, it seemed like they built a wall of Jericho around us, and 100 Joshuas and 1,000 children couldn't knock the wall down if they blowed trumpets and shouted till their throats bust. Once someone bunched up in that parlor around me and Mrs. Holton, I couldn't have cried even if I was as fragile as Emma Collins. But I was hoping Ma would peg it on me being groaned. We were near about home before she wrapped her arm around my neck and pulled me into her and said, "Elijah Freeman, I knowed you could do it. What you done was real groaned. Wait till I tell your daddy." I felt so proud. I was afeard I'd bust, but all that happened was that same stuff in my nose commenced to loosening up and slopping around all over again, and that don't make no sense. It don't make no sense at all. Okay, so when you post your response, first of all, this is Miss Holton, who Mr. Leroy has been clearing her land for her because she got through with her 2 girls, but her husband didn't. So now we know that he is dead. And what surprised me, it said the letter had been written a year ago. That's how long it took the letter to get to Buxton from America. And it was written by someone she had known, and they buried him and, properly and like with a Christian burial. So just respond about your thoughts about that letter and just the whole maybe reaction of Miss Holton. She was almost relieved, I guess, because basically there's no contact with her husband because there's no way to have contact or communication, I guess. So she's just hoping and praying that he gets through, but now she knows that's not going to happen. So she said, the false hope was almost worse. Okay, I look forward to hearing from you.